Jesus. And if you grew up in church, then it's one that you've heard before. You recognize it. It's called the parable of the talents. And it can be a little confusing to us when we hear this word today, because talent means something different to us in English than it meant to them at that time. The New Living Translation, which is one that we sometimes use here, calls it a bag of silver, and I think the NIV is what we used here, and it's called a bag of silver. And that's really pretty close to what the word talent means. But I want you to think about it differently. See, in Israel, the talent would have been, this is where Jesus was, the talent would have been basically a bag of pure silver ore. It wouldn't have been like silver coins. It would have been more like silver ore. And the bankers used to use this as a measurement. They would weigh this silver against the coins that would be put on the other end of the scale. So the talent itself was typically only used in really large type transactions. The talent of silver weighed approximately 33 grams, and in today's market value, that's $14,000 worth of silver. In Jesus' day, one talent would have been worth about 20 years of wages for the average worker. So if you think about, an average worker in America makes $46,000 according to some study I looked at. That's about $1 million over 20 years is what that talent is worth. So this is not, the talent that we talk about here is not a small amount of money. It's a large resource. And the talent is kind of like an investment portfolio. Think about it that way. People don't carry $1 million in cash, right? People, when you go to Walmart, they don't cash out their 401k to do their shopping at Walmart. This is like not an everyday standard unit of money. This is something like your retirement account. This talent would be out here. It's not that you don't have it. It's not that it's not money that you own. It's just something you don't carry around with you and spend. So think about the talent in Jesus' parable like this. This is a large amount of resources, collected resources. Think about it like maybe an investment portfolio, okay? So in the story, we have these three servants, and they're trusted to go and manage their master's estate, his property. And he's traveling abroad on a long trip. In the Gospel of Luke's version, he's actually going because there's another country that wants to appoint him as the king over there, so he's going over there to help lead that country for a little while. In Matthew's version account, it doesn't mention that. So for the purpose of our message, the purpose of our theme for this entire month of June, I want us to think about the master as being the source, the talent as being the resource, and then the investments that these two faithful servants made as being the outsource. So we're going to talk about source, resource, and outsource for the next few weeks. As it relates to our own families and in the life of our church, we recognize ultimately that God is the source of everything, right? We do agree that God's the source, I hope. I think that everything that we've been given in life, from A to Z, those are His resources. It all kind of belongs to God anyway. And God expects us to manage this planet and everything on it to the best of our abilities. If we even look back at the creation story in Genesis, we see that God is the source, and He gives Adam, every resource in the garden. He gets to name the animals, he gets to do all this stuff, and he says to Adam, everything that grows here is for you. Everything on this planet is for you. Now go, be fruitful, and multiply. In other words, go and make an increase of everything that's here. Hebrews 2:7 says that God made human beings a little bit lower than the angels, but here's the interesting thing. He says He appointed them to do the works of His hands. In other words, God has created human beings to manage His resources. When I was in college, I had Western Civ teachers. They would assign readings, and they would do lectures, and they'd talk about things in Genesis 1. And they would say Genesis 1 is basically the cause of all of our ecological problems and overpopulation. They argue that because we believe God made us more special as human beings, that we felt like we had the right to just do whatever we wanted to with the planet, to consume all the natural resources, to hoard up wealth for ourselves, and basically have divine sanction to kind of overpopulate and subdue the earth. That's probably not the dumbest thing that I've ever heard but it would rank right up there with one of the dumbest things I ever heard or read. Because it's actually, it's completely opposite of what the story in Genesis 1 is telling us. In the story, God, the source, is looking out at the flowering plants. He's looking out at the planet, and he says, this is good. This is really good. Everything I've made here is good. And then he says to Adam, and you're very good. Now, I want you to go and multiply this goodness. Multiply goodness everywhere that you go. That's what being fruitful and multiplying means. It's multiplying the goodness that God set on creation. Adam was basically in a glorified garden, so to speak, and he was a gardener of this garden. And God said to him, go make more gardeners. Go make more people to take care of this goodness and this beauty. So back to the parable, we have the source and the resource, God giving us everything that we have to manage. And then we have the outsource. We have these two faithful servants who basically use this opportunity to increase or multiply the goodness or the wealth of the master. So the Greek kind of hints at a couple things that are lost in translation. First of all, I think it may even say the verse, but the servants, it says that they went straightway. They went immediately out. So they didn't tarry or they didn't delay. They had an immediate response when they were given the resource. I'm immediately going to do something with this. And the second interesting thing that's there, and it's a very, you have to pay careful attention to the way it's phrased. It says the faithful servant put the resource to work. He put the money to work. Now, why is that important? That phrase, put to work, means to produce, to trade, or exchange as in business. It's interesting to me, very interesting to me, that Jesus didn't say that the men went straight to work, but instead that they immediately put the resources to work. The servants didn't go out and start digging ditches or waiting tables to try and make their master's money increase. That wasn't what they did. They didn't go out and try to earn a living and then put their earnings into their master's account. Instead, they took their master's resources and they put those resources to work. So why the emphasis here? And I spent some time pacing around trying to figure out exactly what's the importance, what's the significance of putting the resource to work as opposed to putting the body to work. I was asking myself questions like, is God a venture capitalist? You know, what does that say about God? I don't know what to think about this. So after a lot of pacing and thinking, I remembered this video I'd seen several months ago. And it was on the economics of ideas. And I was never really good at economics. Probably my least favorite subject in college was economics. The other would have been statistics. And I think the reason why I didn't like economics was because there was so much statistics being used in economics that I just thought, oh, I hate this. I really hate statistics too. Do you ever hear the one about the statistician who drowned while walking across a river with an average depth of 4 feet? Awesome. Either you got that or you didn't. This video is Matt Ridley, and he makes a difficult concept easier for me to understand when it comes to economics. And the concept that he describes here is called comparative advantage. Matt Ridley, to give you some background, is also the guy who turned me on to the essay I-Pencil. We talked about that a couple months ago. He's a very creative and original thinker when it comes to human beings. His book, The Rational Optimist, kind of came to me through Martin. Martin gave me an article to read. So this is some mind mapping of where I got to where I'm at. Comparative advantage is a process that works in economics, specifically in trade, and it's a benefit to societies because they become free to specialize in particular areas. It's also what works in natural selection, just so you know that. Even if two groups are not equally skilled, like if one is much more skilled than the other, if they trade, they still both benefit because it allows them to specialize. It may not make sense. Hopefully it will. We'll watch this little, it's less than 3 minutes, maybe 2.5 minute clip explaining this, if we have that ready.